These things are horrible. But I don't think Israel has really gone too far. What Hamas has done is unprecedented. For them, civilians are basically human shields, and many of these twisted extremists actually want to maximize civilian casualties for PR reasons. I'm Allister Heath, and once again I'm responding to some of the excellent reader comments on my latest article concerning Starmer declaring war on Western values, the rise of anti-Israel sentiment in Britain, and also the tragic increase in anti-Semitism. The first question is from David Jones, who says, Starmer is clearly petrified of Corbynites and the Greens. There is no depth low enough that we will not sink to in order to desperately cling to their votes. The weakness that he exudes is truly embarrassing. Well, yes, David, I agree. I think there's a massive shift to the far left in British politics at the moment, as well as a shift to the populist right. But I think for Starmer, his main market is moving leftwards. He has lost vast numbers of voters, possibly millions, to the Greens and to the new party that Jeremy Corbyn wants to launch. And those two parties are united when it comes to foreign policy. They profoundly dislike Israel. They're profoundly anti-Israel. And I think Starmer is tapping into that sentiment. That is why he has himself shifted positions. But I don't think it's only about domestic UK politics and the rise of anti-Israel sentiment and even anti-Semitism among the British public. I think there's a second element that's also playing an important role here, and that is international politics. Starmer is desperate to be aligned with the European Union when it comes to everything, to be honest, but in particular when it comes to foreign policy. So he's aping Macron and the Spanish and some of the others who have become virulently anti-Israel. Starmer is joining in. He wants to be part of that club. Another person who's doing that is the Canadian Prime Minister. They all see themselves as being in it together, as creating a united front. And I think that is very dangerous because I think the policy is entirely misguided. The next question is from Colin Mason. The writer claims Israel is a democracy, but unlike other democratic countries in the world, Israel does not abide by international law and the Geneva Convention. It has become a pariah state. Now, obviously, that is entirely wrong. Israel does abide by international law and the Geneva Convention, so that's just wrong. But I think I've got a broader point here. I think what's happening is that the left and the woke and various other groups are trying to weaponize international law to turn it into some sort of rule that bans all warfare, including defensive warfare. There's a fundamental principle of war which everybody agrees with, and everybody has always agreed with, that there can be a just war as long as it respects certain rules. For example, a just war is a war that is fought in self-defense because a country tries to invade you, for example. And I think the far left are trying to say that all wars are inevitably illegal, that all wars should be banned, that nobody should ever be able to defend themselves. And I think that's entirely wrong, and I think that's an idea that has to be fought. There's another problem here, which is that the international legal system is becoming corrupted by political actors. So instead of some of these courts being run properly, professionally, by independent people, some of them are becoming politicized and are coming up with judgments for political reasons, not for legal reasons. Again, I think that's very dangerous and needs to be fought. The next question is from William Morris. Israel appears to be trying to create a greater Israel, recovering the land promised to Abraham. That it would include the area from the Nile to the Euphrates, including Jordan and part of Saudi Arabia and Iraq. Ha 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 is my answer to that. That is a grotesque conspiracy theory. It's entirely mad, demented even. Of course, Israel doesn't want to invade Saudi Arabia and Egypt and Iraq. That is a crazy idea. It's being propagated by people who literally don't want anybody to understand what is happening here. I don't think it's a serious proposal from anybody at all, and it's never going to happen. So the next question is by Rob Cantrell. The problem isn't the average Brit, they support Jewish people. It's the liberal left, the universities, the media, the Labour Party, Starmer, woke celebs. They hate Jews, it's sick and twisted, and time they were shown the exit door, removed and disgraced from their jobs, and yes, jailed. Well, I don't think all of those people hate Jews. I certainly don't think the government hates Jews. I think Starmer is not an anti-Semite, but I think he's making a terrible mistake, which is fueling anti-Semitism via his over-the-top, unfair and false critiques of Israel. Of course, every country deserves to be criticised. I spend my whole time criticising the British government and Keir Starmer. That doesn't mean that I hate Britain. I love Britain, so that's not the case. But I think it's this incessant, exaggerated double standards that are the problem. Now, I also don't entirely agree with the premise that the public is on one side and the elites on another side. I think both share both the good and the bad. So I believe that there's been a very large increase in anti-Semitism among the British public as measured by YouGov. A recent survey showed that 21% of the population now is anti-Semitic as defined by agreeing or supporting 4 different anti-Semitic tropes. That's much, much more than it was last year, and is roughly twice what it was 3 or 4 years ago. That increase obviously has gone hand in hand with the war in Gaza. There's a sad paradox, which is that whenever Israel is attacked, anti-Semitism goes up, and then when Israel defends itself, anti-Semitism goes up again. That keeps happening. That's been the case for 20 or 30 years across the West. But yes, I think a lot of the liberal elites have gone too far. They have veered into anti-Semitism. Their Israelophobia is toxic and dangerous. But I also think that large swathes of the public have become convinced by the arguments. In some cases, it's because false claims keep being made, keep circulating on the internet, on social media, on TikTok and so on. And even when they're eventually refuted, it's too late. Some of the mud sticks. And slowly but surely, prejudice mounts. And I think that is a very dangerous place to be. The next point or question is from Simon Jones. Israel has gone too far. The 7th of October was appalling. No reasonable person could support that butchery. But what Israel is doing now is worse and I believe ultimately counterproductive. By its indiscriminate killing and the starving of women and children, it is laying the ground for thousands of new terrorists. So I'm happy that Simon agrees that the terrorist attacks by Hamas were appalling and no one should support them. That's good. I agree with that. Sadly, not everybody agrees with that. You've got a constituency that believes it was actually an act of liberation. I think that's crazy. And I think Simon is right to condemn that. But I don't think Israel has really gone too far. I think it's no different here than any other urban war, any other war of survival. We've completely forgotten in the West what the Second World War looked like, for example. We've even forgotten about Fallujah when the Allies were fighting an urban war just a decade or so ago in the Middle East. These things are horrible. And what Hamas has done is unprecedented. They've used billions and billions and billions of dollars of foreign aid to build an incredible network of tunnels, something entirely unprecedented. As a result, Gaza is basically the most fortified urban landscape in history. No one's ever managed to do something like that before. And for them, civilians are basically human shields. The terrorists are hiding in these tunnels and the civilians are the human shields. And many of these twisted extremists actually want to maximize civilian casualties for PR reasons. That is basically the situation that is faced here. And I fear that by misunderstanding this and by not having a sufficient historic and military understanding of these sorts of conflicts throughout history, we are coming to this in a naive, almost pacifist way. This is a war. Wars are horrible. We need to avoid wars almost at any cost. But tragically, sometimes you need to have a war. I'm not sure what other options there are. I hope there's another option. And I think what the West should be doing, instead of condemning Israel wrongly, it should be demanding that Hamas surrenders, that its leaders depart, and that all the hostages are free. That would be the simplest way of ending this war while minimizing the bloodbath that we see. The next question is from Ian MacDonald. Criticizing Israel is not anti-Semitism. I have long been a supporter of Israel from the Six Day and Yom Kippur War onwards, but what they're prosecuting now is beyond the pale, including the latest act of lunacy, an aerial attack on Qatar, which is quite simply an act of war. Netanyahu is an embarrassment to the cause of Israel, and to say so is completely legitimate. Yes, you're right, it is perfectly fine to say that Netanyahu is an embarrassment if that's what you believe. I think Keir Starmer is an embarrassment to Britain. That doesn't make me anti-British. What you said doesn't make you anti-Israel. In fact, if I just read your comments, I do not think that you're anti-Israel or an anti-Semite or anything like that. I think you're just criticizing a particular execution of a war. That is fine if that is your opinion. Personally, I don't actually agree with the the points you're making. I think this is basically an inevitable war, but I accept your alternative point of view. The problem I have is that's not how many people who are taking part in this debate are operating. Many of them are propagating fake news, fake pictures, false information, and so on, and they are basically engaging in blood libels against Israel and in practice against Jews also. And this is what I object to. I do not object to anybody criticizing or holding a country to account. Everybody should always be doing that. Every country needs scrutiny. Every war needs scrutiny. What I object to is double standards, unmeetable moral thresholds that no other country has ever met. You can't, for example, only criticize Israel for engaging in an urban war, never criticize anybody else. You cannot only be obsessed with this conflict and no other conflict, that sort of thing. That's all we have time for this week. Thank you to all our subscribers for your comments. Keep them coming, and as usual, we will try and respond to as many of you as possible.